So we really a little bit in middle on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. We just barely didn't get to finish the parak. We were talking about Kvarim. So if you remember, the Mishnah had described the general form of the Kvarim. They had a chatzar, an outdoor courtyard that was 6 by 6, and it was a machlokes about whether there were 2 or 4 ma'aras, or caves, or tombs that were opened into from the courtyard on 2 of the sides or 4 of the sides. And those ma'aras, there was a machlokes in the Mishnah. Right? One man, the Amar said, Tanakama said, it was 6 by 8. I'm sorry, it was 4 by 6. That was the Tanakama said 4 by 6. And Rav Shimon said it was 6 by 8. Because he had the Tanakama only had 8 what do you call it, kvarim, or actual graves that were sticking out of the sides of the Ma'ara, and Rav Shimon had 13. That's what we were up to. So it's 3 lines from the bottom of Kuf Aleph on the base. Tanan Hasan. Motzei es mace mushkav kedarkai. If someone finds a mace, a lone mace without any indication, didn't know it was there, and it was placed in the normal way, meaning it was buried. It was a normal way to place a mace generally with the legs sticking out and the hands folded over. So that indicates that he was buried there. He wasn't just a mace that ended up there. So it's going to be, as you're going to see, there's 3 levels when you find a mace. Someone who's buried in a full-fledged cemetery, and you know he's part of a cemetery, you're not allowed to move him. Even if you just, let's say, you want to use that place for high rise. You can't move a mace. It's not covered on mace. If a mace is buried, but it's not clear from the circumstances, it's clear that he was buried there, but it's not clear that he was placed there as part of a full-fledged cemetery, then you can move him. But there's a din that you have to take tpusasa. You have to take along with him a certain amount of earth underneath. Since he's buried, we assume that some of the fluids, some of the mace itself got absorbed into the surrounding earth. So when you reinter that mace, which you're allowed to do, if you need the spot, you can reinter that mace. Since we don't know that it was part of an official cemetery, it was just buried there. He's not part of a cemetery. So you can move him, but you have to take along some of the earth. But if you find him without any indication that he was buried there, he's not even in the form, he's not in the posture that someone who's buried is, then you can move him. You don't even have to take anything, because there's no reason to assume that he was placed there at all. So what this Mishnah is saying is, if you found someone in the middle case, you found a mace that was clearly buried, but he's all by himself, so we don't have a reason to assume he's part of a cemetery. We're on the bottom of Kuf Aleph on the base. So continuing about Kvarim. So when you find such a mace, you can take him, but you have to take along with him some of the dirt. Shnayim noitlam vest tvisasa. The same thing as if there's 2. 2 is still not enough to make us assume that it's a kever, that it's a beis hakfaros, that it's a cemetery where you're not allowed to move them. But matzah shloisha, if you find 3, im yesh b'neihem me'arba v'ad shmayna, harei zu shchunas kvaros. If you find that the 3 are spread out between 4 and 8 amas, we assume it's part of a cemetery. And so therefore, the rules that we said about when you find someone in a cemetery, that you're not allowed to move him altogether. You can't, even if you take along some dirt, you're not allowed to move him. Although a number of years ago, my father was buried in a cemetery in Deans, New Jersey. They made a separate chelik for Kehanim. And over time, that area started to get flooded. So they paskin that we had to reinter the mace because of the deterioration of the cemetery. It wasn't covered on mace. But absent something like that, I mean, there are dinim about you find in like these East European cemeteries that they'll get a psak to move a rebbe because it's not guaranteed that they'll continue to be able to have kavod hameis. But unless there's some circumstance, generally, if someone's buried in a beis hakvaros, you can't move them. So if you find 3 mason, so that's enough to indicate that this is a beis hakvaros, and the amount of space between them is between 4 and 8. Now, 4 and 8 is a problematic amount because we saw the Tanakama said that the small side, it's the ma'aris, the tombs around which the graves were situated, was between 4 and 6. And Rav Shimon said it was between 6 and 8, but no one said between 4 and 8. So the Gemara is going to try to understand where does this come from. But if the Mishnah seems to say that the size of these ma'aras can be between 4 and 8. So if it's between those amounts, we assume it's part of a formal ma'ara, and therefore it's treated as a beis hakvaros, a rezu shchunas kvaros. And therefore, since you found already that's part of a beis hakvaros, not only can you not remove those kfarim, those bodies, you also have to go and check 20 amas around it. Now, the 20 amas is going to be another problem that the Gemara is going to address later on. How do you get to 20 amas? We had seen 2 shitas. The chatzar in the middle, everyone agrees is 6 amas. We had seen 2 shitas about the length of the maras on each side, right? The one, the Tanakama said it was 6, and Rav Shimon said it was 8. But neither of them, if you do 8, so if you, let's say you assume that it's the full length, he's telling you to check the full length of a chatzar with 2 ma'aras on each side of it. According to the Tanakama, 820 is too long. According to Tanakama, it's 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18. And according to Rav Shimon, it's 8 plus 6 plus 8, which is 22. So in either way, the Gemara is going to ask, where does the number 20 come from? So, and it says, Motzei echad b'seif esrim. If you find even one b'seif esrim, you don't say that since it's only one, it has a din that it's not a shchunas kfaros, because this is already established as a beis hakvaros. Once you find something within 20 amas, you have to assume it's still part of the same beis hakvaros. By the gemenu alone chaf amma, then you have to search another 20 amas from the one that you found. Sheglayim l'davar, because now there's already a reglayim l'davar. Since you found this one next to the other 3, there's reason to assume you're in the beis hakvaros. While on the other hand, if you just found one on its own, like we said at the beginning of the Mishnah, you would be allowed to take it. You wouldn't assume it's a beis hakvaros just for one. Now the Gemara is going to get back to the first question we had asked. Money. When we say that if you find the 3 mason between 4 and 8 amas, who is this like? No one said 4 by 8. So why are you saying if it's between 4 and 8? According to Rav Shimon, the minimum has to be 6, because if you find 3 in a more compressed amount of space than a ma'ara would be, then you would have to assume that it was just put there temporarily. That's not the way you would normally do a formal burial. And if it's more than 8 apart, that's more than the maximum amount. So actually, it's Rav Shimon who says it's 6 by 8, that the ma'ara, the tombs that were on either side of the chatzor were really 6 by 8. So why do we say 4 by 8? V'aytanu detanya, motzon ritzufin, ve'en beinhein midalad amas ad ches, yesh len tfusa ve'en len shchunas kvaros. This is another brisa that has a different version of Rav Shimon, that says that Rav Shimon did not require a 6 by 8 mara, but rather a 4 by 8 mara. And you see this in the course of telling you a different thing. If you found the number of buried mason, but they're like we said, they're more compressed. They're not within Dalet Amas. They're not more than Dalet Amas apart, or they're less than, or they're more than Ches Amas apart. Yesh lahem tfusa ve'en lahem shchunas kvaros. So since they're not within the 4x8, which you see from this Mishnah has a different version of Rav Shimon that he says a width of 4 and a length of 8. So if it's not within that amount, doesn't have a din of shchunas kvaros. Rav Shimon and Yehuda and Mishum Rav Shimon. Shimon Yehuda says b'shem Rav Shimon.
So what does that mean? What does it mean, Joe? If you have, it's not a shchunas kvaros, so tfusa meaning in that you can move them.
Then it becomes like the intermediate case where they're buried properly. So you see that they weren't just left there. So you're allowed to move them, but you have to take along some of the earth. Unlike if you found just a mace without any indication it was buried, you don't even have the din of tfusa. So it becomes the intermediate case that we discussed where it's just looked on as a single body that was buried. We just have to take what's underneath it. So that's the first tan of that Mishnah. Says, since it's not within the sheet of Rav Shimon of what would be a ma'ara, of what the way they would arrange their tombs, so you have to assume that they were just placed there individually. Rav Shimon Yehuda and Mishum Rav Shimon Roy Nesem Tzayin Kilu Einan. He says even if you have 3 of them and they're only separated by, let's say you have 5 Motzei Tzufin. Motzei Tzufin means that you found, let's say, 10 bodies, but they were all compressed in, let's say, 6 amas. You don't have 3 within Dalet Midal Radches, but rather you have, let's say, 10, and they were only 8 amas apart. Rav Shimon ben Yehuda says that B'Shem Rav Shimon, you can disregard the extra mason. V'asham mitzdarfen. And then you could just look at it that you only have 3 that end up being, let's say, 6 amas, and that's good enough. Because he holds you can disregard the extra. The Gemara is going to go through in a minute what the svara is why you disregard them. But Mayu came to Rav Shimon, back to the Gemara. But before we get back to that, we're saying that this brisa that we just mentioned is going like Rav Shimon. Ema Seifa. And we said that the first Mishnah, right, that said Motzei Shloshim Yesh B'nei Ma'arav Shmoed is going like Rav Shimon. But for the Gemara, Ema Seifa Boy the Kamenu Alon Esrim Amma. It goes on to say in that Mishnah that you have to buy 20 amas. Money. Who is that like? Rav Shimon Esrim V'Tartan Havin. Like we said, according to Rav Shimon, who holds that the length of a mara, the length hasn't changed, even according to this version of Rav Shimon that says that the lower amount is 4 amas. He doesn't argue on the, but he still argues, excuse me, on the length, and the length he says is 8 amas. So 2 maras of 8 plus a chutzner of 6 is 22. That's a V'Tartan Havin. And here Rabbanan Tamni sorry Havin. According to Rabbanan, it would be 18.
What about the 3 that you found? Why don't you mind them?
Those would consist of the 1 mara. Or we say
3 that you found, you say
20 amas away.
Yeah, subtract those 3.
It's a good question. Why you should say, even if it's like at the furthest end.
Yeah.
But you should still, it takes up at least an amma for each. So the most you should have to do is 17. I guess it means including the space of these. It means go 20 amas, including the space of these.
Including the space of the 3, right?
Of what you found. We're going according to Rabbanan. According to Rabbanan, we said it only comes out to 18 amas. We could go in the bodik al chasayna. The Rashbam teaches this, and it's saying that you have to be baidik. When you baidik, you can't be baidik just straight in a straight line, because it might look like the bodies are put in one straight line, that they're all parallel to each other, but it might be that it's actually a little bit off, and the next set of bodies are not directly opposite. So you have to be baidik in a diagonal form. So that adds essentially to the 6 amas, it adds on 2. In fact, the Gemara, if you're going to do the Mara that you found these bodies in, the mason in, you're going to say you're going to do it on a diagonal, and that's why it ends up longer. So the other Mara that you're looking for, you should also search with a diagonal, and then it should end up being an extra 2 amas there as well. So we don't force him to do 2. The al-Chasain is to be extra careful to make sure you're not missing, but you don't have to assume that it goes so far off that you're going, because you realize if you go al-Chasain, it means in both ways. So you're going to end up having to go in 2 different directions. It's going to widen your shirts a lot if you have to do the other side as well. Rav Shisha ber Davidi Amar, he answers different. It's really going according to Reb Shimon. We said according to Reb Shimon, each of them aris are 8. So you have 2 8s and 1 6. The chatzar middle of 6. So it should have been 22. Why did we say 20? And we're talking over here, we found small, like we had answered before when we were trying to answer how you had the kvarim, the graves in the corners. We said they fit in because they were graves of stillbirths. So they take up less room. So over here also they were less room. They say they only needed 6 amas instead of 8. So let's assume the others are also nefilim. Going back to this brisa that we had brought in as shver, that just said that we brought a machlekes with a Rav Shimon ben Yehuda said b'shem Rav Shimon that you could ignore, even if you have 10 mason within 6 amas, you can, or within 8 amas, you can leave out the additional 7 and just look at the 3 as constituting the Mara. Those were the real ones that were brave. They were placed there, while the Rabbanan disagreed and said, no, since there's too many, it's clear that this is not supposed to be a Mara. This is not a grave set. So Gemara says we have a kasha from the din of Klein. Kerem hanatu al pachas me'arba amas. If you have a vineyard, where we know the din of a vineyard is that you're not allowed to have wheat planted together with your vineyard, it becomes Klein. But if you have there's 2 separate dinim. There's a din of a kerem, when something is a vineyard, anything within the vineyard is going to be, if you have any wheat within it, it's Klein. But if you have individual vines, then there's just a din that they have to be, I think, 4 tfachim away from them, but it doesn't have a din that anything inside of it is going to make a Klein. So it's going to make a big difference whether something is considered to be a vineyard or not. So kerem hanatua al pachas me'arba amas. If you have a kerem where I think the minimum amount of vines is 7, but you have over here too many of them put close together, so you have extra vines, so making it that it's like overgrown. Rav Shimon Omer ain't a kerem. It doesn't have a din of a kerem because it's not. It doesn't have the regular. Usually, you have 4 amas between each row. It's overgrown. So the Rabbanan, Rav Shimon says, it's not a kerem. You don't have a good kerem because it's not going to work like this. You're going to have to uproot it. We disregard the intermediate, the extra vines that are in middle that are oversaturated, and you ignore them and you look at the ones that are 4 amas apart, and that's what makes a kerem. So this is the exact opposite of what we had said legabi graves. Legabi graves, Rav Shimon ben Yehuda said b'shem Rav Shimon that we were royin as emtsoim ki'ilu, as if they're not there. And the Rabbanan disagreed, and over here it's the other way around. So the Rabbanan. Kasha the Rabbanan adoran, kasha the Rebbe, Rav Shimon ad Rav Shimon. So come on, Rav Shimon ad Rav Shimon lekasha. Hasam le'natoi enshi adayat li'aka. He says over there, a person doesn't plant his vines and then take them out. If he planted them there, he wants them there, so we don't expect him to take them out. But by your grave, if you find a kever too many kvarim in close proximity, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's not a formal Beis HaKvaros. It means that they just were in a rush and they had to find a place. So Ben Hashmashos, they put it there and then they forgot it. But it doesn't take away from the permanence of the Beis HaKvaros. But a vine, a person, if he plants it there, he wanted it there. The Rabban nami lekasha. And you could also answer the Rabban. Hacha kivin the minol lemikri kever. Since it's menuvel, it's not bakavadik, to have so many graves so close to each other, it's not called a kever in the first place, so we can't call it a Beis HaKvaros. But by a vineyard, he lets it grow, and he says, I'll see which one grows better, and I'll pick the better ones, so it doesn't take away from its name as a as a kerem, and therefore it could still have the din of a kerem l'gabi klo. Let's see our Mishnah. This is a little. It's interesting. It's a little bit of numbers, I know, but it's fairly simple. It's really not. You don't have to keep that many things in mind, and you don't even have to know any of them, really, to be honest with you. But generally, the idea is a base core is 30 saw. Each saw, a base core is an area of land that you can grow 30 saw of tfu on it, and each saw is an area that you can grow 6 kavim on it. So essentially, there's 180 kavim in a base core. So base core offer ani meichla. I should say Paris. Someone sends this chaver, I'm selling you a plot of land that's a base core, and it's arable land. It's land that's suitable to be cultivated. If it contains cracks or crevices in the ground that are 10 tfachim deep, or rocks that are 10 tfachim high, when Reuven makes the sale to Shimon of this property, he says, I'm giving you a base core. The base core excludes these areas that have rocks that are more than 10 tfachim high, or cracks that are more than 10 tfachim below ground level. The Rashbam says that he foreshadows the Gemara as he often does. The Gemara is going to explain this is talking about where the ground is, the cracks are unable to be cultivated. There's water inside the cracks, and therefore they can't be used even underground. Pachas mikan, however, if these rocks or these cracks are less than 10 tfachim high or less than 10 tfachim deep, nimdad ima. He doesn't have to add on to his base core. He could just include these as part of the base core that he's selling. However, if he said to him kibase core offer, he didn't say I'm selling you a base core, but he said I'm selling you about a base core. So he put in some what do you call it? Some weasel words to let him get out of his obligations. So I'm selling you about a base core. Even if there are cracks that are more than 10 tvachim deep, or he has rocks more than 10 tvachim high, they are measured together with the rest of the property. The seller doesn't have to add extra area to make up for these non-arable portions. Okay, should we go a little bit weiter in the Gemara? Yeah,
I'm fine.
Okay, because most of our wives are still cleaning up. We can give them another 10 minutes. Someone heard that. Time to get back to work.
Yo, you gotta be careful, yo. We're all on
People
speaker.
listening?
Yeah, we're all on speaker.
Zaktim Tanan Hasan. Hamakdish Sadeyu. We're going to go from the din. In the Mishnah, we talked about the din of when you sell a field that contains portions that are not usable. Now we're going to learn from a Mishnah that talks about where you makdish a sada, b'shas hayovel, and it's during the yovel. So during the yovel, we've come across this din before. The Torah set a set amount that you have to pay to be paida a stei achuza, and it only relates to a sada that could be used for planting. It doesn't relate to land that's used for residences. So the Torah says when you're paida such land, you pay back essentially 50 shekel kesef for a base core. That's the set rate. And as we're going to see in the Gemara in a minute, that will be proportionate. If you do a half a core, instead of being 50 shekel, it'll be 25 shekel. It will be proportionate. But that's a set rate that the Torah made for being paida from someone who wants to redeem. If he sold his stei achuza, if he wants to buy it back. So
the Torah didn't believe in inflation?
No, this is talking about where you makdish it. So you want to be paid it. So that's the cost to. It's almost like a din of hektish. You're being makdish a certain amount of money. When you give your land, essentially what you're doing is giving that amount of money to hektish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, its shekel is silver. I don't know if you looked at the commodity prices, but the shekel goes along with the inflation. The price of silver goes up anyway. It's not currency.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who's makdish is sada b'shas hayovel. So b'shas hayovel meaning during the time when the yovel is in effect. So we still have this din of that you pay 50 shekel, and it's also going to be proportionate to how many years there are till the yovel, right? So it's essentially 1 shekel per year for base core. Noisun loy lebeis zera chaymes ayrim. You give for a base zera chaymes ayrim, which is essentially a base core, 50 shekel kasef. That's the amount that you have to pay to be paid. If it has, like we said in our Mishnah, the same din as our Mishnah, if you have cracks that are 10 tvachim deep or rocks that are 10 tvachim high, they're not measured together with this karka. Meaning, when you come to be paid it from hektish, it doesn't have this special din that when you paid it from hektish a stei achuza that you pay 50 shekel for a base core, but rather that section that is not arable land is not included as a sada, and therefore you have to pay for it like anything else you makdish to hektish. You have to pay whatever its value is to be paid it. Pachas mikan, but if it's less than 10 tfachim deep or high, nimdadim ima. It's counted together with the karka. Correct Gemara. Why do we say if it's higher than 10 tvachim, well, really not higher than tvachim we understand, but why if there's a crack that's more than 10 tvachim deep, is it not considered to be hektish? It's not considered to be a sada that's hektish. It's true it's separate from the rest of the field, but it's just down below ground level, but it still could be planted. So why don't you treat it as a separate stei hektish? And if you'll say if you'll say that this din that you pay 50 shekel for a base core only applies when you have a full base core, and this is less than a base core, this is just a small section of land that's deeper, that's in a ditch. But Tanya sada. Why does the Torah say sada when it says b'mistei achuzasa yakdish? It says zera chayim. It says we're talking about planting barley. So we're talking about planting. So what do you have to say sada? Obviously we're talking about a field if you're planting barley in it. I'm sorry. It's only where, if we didn't say sada, I would say only where you did a base core. Minayin l'rabba is lesech, a half of a core, b'chatzi lesech, or a quarter of a base core. Saw, he did a saw, a tarkav, which is, I think, 3 kavim, b'chatzi tarkav, or half of a kav, how do we know any amount of land that was hukdash, that he could be paid it with this proportionate rate that the Torah imposes? The Torah tells you any amount. So the Gemara is back to its question. The Gemara is asking, why are you saying if you have a ditch, listen, the cellar we understand, you can't grow anything on a rock. But if you have a ditch in the ground, why can't you grow on the bottom of the ditch and treat it as a separate din of hektish? Even though it's separate from the rest of the field, it should still apply the same din that you have that proportionate amount. Like we see that we do any small amount, we always, no matter how small the sod is, it still has that din. Fukubachama answers, over here we're talking about where the holes in the ground, these ditches, are full of water. They're not arable, so it's the same thing as the rock. It can't be grown. Since we said it, just like we said, it's similar to the rock, so you see that it means that it's also talking about where it's not able to be grown. If that's the case, that it's unable to be grown, the Gemara asks, so what difference does it make if it's less than 10 tefachim below the ground? But this is a section that can't be grown, so it shouldn't be considered part of the sada. So I want to know, even though it could be considered part of this sada, even though it's not growable, hanu nagani da'ara mikru, shadu da'ara mikru. These are considered the bumps in the ground, the depressions in the ground, or the bumps sticking out of the ground. They're still part of the ground. They're just something that's inconsequential, that's less than 10 tvachim. Even if it's not able to grow, you have a rock or you have a ditch, that's still considered part of the field. It's as long as it's within 10 tvachim, it's still considered part of the same field. So now the Gemara goes back. Hachamai. So we said the din, this is all the gabi hektish, that we say we're talking about where there's water in it and therefore it can't be grown. What's the din over here? Is the crack that the Mishnah referred to, is it talking about with water or even without water? Amar Papa, the din when you sell a field, if it's less than 10 tvachim, even if it's, if it's more than 10 tvachim, even if it's not full of water, it's still not considered to be part of the field, and he has to make up for it by giving him more karka that's at the same level. My timer, doesn't want to give money to have one field, and it should be separated. The Gemara makes it sound like it's a problem that it's not going to look good, but the real problem is just its effort. He's going to have to take his tractor and bring it down to a different level. It's much more inconvenient. The person wants to have one level field. Our Mishnah said it's dumya. It said both a hole, which we're saying now it could even be that it doesn't. It's capable of being grown, but since it's more than 10 tefachim, it's considered to be separate. And we compare it to a rock, which isn't able to be grown. So it should be the same thing. So no, I wanted to say that if it's less than that, even a rock that is not able to be grown, even that is going to be considered part. Like we said, it's just a feature of the ground, but it's not considered to be a separate area, and therefore will be sold along with the rest of the karka. Okay, I think we'll stop over here.
What time tomorrow?